I'm Eddy Webb. I am a content designer at TCP on the World of Darkness MMO. And this is Playing to Lose, which is based on a theory I've been working around, the idea that trying to do things to potentially have negative consequences for your character actually is beneficial for you and for the game as a whole in the long run. So before I go into this, though, I do want to go through some disclaimers. Like with all of my presentations like this, these are just some personal theories I have. It's because they pay me money to sit around and think about these things. It doesn't mean that my theories are automatically right. It just means I'm a huge nerd. Some of these are built on the back of some of the previous theories I've done. This is actually the first presentation I've done that's actually iterative based on previous theories. I will go into and reference all the relevant points through this, but if you want more information on some of my earlier theories, they are at my website, which is eddyfate.com, under the link of free stuff. And like all of my theories, this is biased towards my personal experiences over large-scale live-action role-playing games over the past 20 years. So my personal experiences are pretty heavily influencing with this. It's kind of hard to get a concrete, objective data, so I get a lot of anecdotes from other people to try to update the theories where I can, but it's still going to be heavily biased towards my personal experiences. And finally, I want to give credit to David Bounds. He's the person who coined the phrase "play to lose" in this context, so I'm shamelessly stealing it from him. So a lot of this starts, I'm going to talk a little bit about my character for a while, but really it's got to give you context for how I got to start thinking about this. And the really big secret about me is that I'm actually kind of shitty at games. I'm really not good at them. And so for years when I first started playing live action games, I tried really hard to win. And I didn't really do very well at them. But because I was so focused on winning and doing well with my characters, no one really remembers much about those characters that I played. And over the years, I ultimately started playing different characters, and I made a few that actually ended up making some pretty big mistakes. And I just decided, you know what, rather than getting angry and trying so hard to win, I'm just going to roll with these and see what happens. And as a result of that, I had one character who, after he was retired, the jacket he wore in-game sold for hundreds of dollars at an auction. And another character who, after he was retired, people were in mourning for the character for over a year. In fact, I found out, that was 5 years ago, I found out they were talking about that character again at this convention. So my question when I started thinking about this was, why do I have these failures, quote unquote, that were actually remembered so fondly, where the characters I tried to win so hard weren't remembered at all? And so I tried something new. I actually made up a new character that was heavily inspired by film noir. And film noir characters don't win. They lose gloriously, and really a lot of film noir plots are about how that character is going to change through the process of terrible things happening to him. So I actually explicitly worked with my storyteller at the time, and I said I want to have some intentional conflict. I want bad things to happen to this character, and how can I make this work out? And because a live-action game is really heavily dependent on other players as well, I also went to the other players, and I told them, this is the experience I want for the character. I want this character to have a ramp-up and then ultimately have glorious failure. And I actually revealed some of the quote-unquote secrets of my character to the players ahead of time. You know, my character, this is a Requiem character, he actually was a defect from a different covenant. And that was a big dirty secret. And I told them, hey, this is what happened to my character. And so when it makes sense for your character to kind of ping on that, you know, take advantage of that. And the result of that was that a lot of players didn't seem to really mind being spoiled about that information so much. And they looked forward to officially learning about those secrets. And they were very cool on trying to make sure that the tension on my character was appropriate. And really, as a result, everyone had a really good experience because they kind of knew where things were going, and everyone had that conversation. And I was really excited because I was getting a lot of stuff that I was enjoying about playing role-playing games, but at a lot less actual effort to me. So I theorized. I had some ideas about how this would possibly work. And before I go further, especially because Michelle's here, I do use the vernacular form of theory. Technically, it's also hypothesis, but theory is what most people understand, so I'm going to use that word, and I apologize officially to all scientists watching and or listening to this. But my theory was that when I tried to win, I never actually stood out. I never actually made an impact on the players around me. But when I lost, people remembered that. And so when I intentionally tried to lose, I got more out of what I wanted. I got more of the impact in the Chronicle than I wanted, and with less effort on my part. And on top of that, other people benefited because they knew ahead of time where I was going and were able to actually wrap around their own interests on that direction. So from there, I was like, is this just me? Am I just in a weird aberration? Did I get lucky? Or is this something I can actually extrapolate and apply to everyone? So as a result of that, I actually went from there into start looking into other theories, hypotheses, and information in the world to see if there was something more universal that at play here. And so the first part of this is a theory I've actually had for a while, which is about winning at LARP. I've talked about winning and losing, and some people don't believe you can win or lose at LARP. And I actually disagree with that. So this theory ultimately is that LARPs are a game. It's a live-action role-playing game. And as a result, the game has certain components. What defines a game has been a lot of contention to game designers for several years. But there's a fantastic textbook called Rules of Play that was put out in 2005 that actually studies the core of game design for video game designers as well as people designing board games, card games, and the like. And the definition that book ultimately settled on was a game is a system in which players engage in artificial conflict defined by rules that results in a quantifiable outcome. And the words quantifiable outcome are probably the key points of this. In LARP, every character does have a quantifiable outcome. It's their character goals, what they're trying to accomplish at the session, in the Chronicle, in that scene. Everyone has goals, and that's the quantifiable outcome. You can win or lose that. So what happens is that not only can you win at LARP, as it were, but you can win multiple times, you can lose multiple times, and multiple people can win or lose at once. So when people talk about you can't win at LARP, they're thinking of what's called zero sum in game design, which is that I win and therefore everybody else must lose, which is a pretty common win condition. But in LARP, that's not the case. You could have lots of cooperative wins and cooperative loss. So individuals may win or lose in a very wide variety, but they are still winning and losing from a game design perspective. So the first part of this is that, intentionally winning, intentionally losing, these are actually quantifiable elements that we can say, yes, these are things that do exist and they do work this way. So the next part of this is, well, I'm having fun with this because everyone had fun with this. That acts on another theory that I actually talked about yesterday in Your Game Sucks, which is that not everyone plays these games for the same reasons. And specifically, I've done some study into why people play large-scale live-action games and have fun at that. And I've come up with 4 distinct play styles that I have found. And very, very briefly, they are actors, those that enjoy vivid character portrayal. Cultivators, those that enjoy mechanical superiority and exploring the system. Fixers, those players that enjoy actually solving problems inside the game. And socialites, those that enjoy social engagement. I do believe that different variations of winning and losing in LARP appeal to these different people in different ways. So what they quantify as a win or a loss depends on their individual playstyle, and people drift playstyles during the course of their career as a gamer, but also inside of an individual game. Yesterday I gave the example of sometimes you've had a bad day at work and you want to come home and just beat up some orcs and get a visceral thrill out of that. Even if you normally see yourself as more of an actor or a role player, sometimes you like to beat stuff up and get that joy from that. So people do shift, but the point is that what you're quantifying, your character goals, depends on your playstyle to a certain extent. But also some playstyles result take losing harder. Cultivators primarily, for them, win and loss scenarios are a little more objective, a little more concrete, and actually ties directly into what they're finding enjoyable. Whereas an actor may take losing a lot less because they're still beginning to portray their character, even if their character's having horrible things happening to them. But it doesn't mean that win and loss are irrelevant to all playstyles, just that they may enjoy different kinds of winning and losing to different levels. So the third part, now that we're going off of game theory, we're actually going into more of a literary theory. And this is the real idea that conflict builds character. And I found this great quote by Stephen Tholen, which is that conflict builds character, but crisis defines it. And that's a great summary of what is pretty common wisdom amongst literary theory, which is that conflict is the main thing that is interesting about characters. And some people theorize it's the only thing interesting. I think that's personally a bit extreme. But a lot of people, when they write narratives, how those characters get defined is through various conflict. And in a typical linear narrative, the conflict actually escalates steadily. So the further you get into the narrative, the more the stakes of those conflicts increase. So this is the 3-act structure. It goes through Act 1, rises through Act 2, it comes to a climax, and then in Act 3, and ultimately tails off. In interactive media, obviously, you don't have that same kind of linear progression of conflict, but still, characters that experience conflict are much more interesting than characters that don't. In Justin's presentation yesterday, he briefly talked about challenge, and that's another key point of pretension, is that there's a point of flow where if the challenge is too weak, people stop playing the game because it's boring. If the challenge is too hard, they stop playing because it's too frustrating. But there needs to be a kind of steady escalation of challenge that commiserate with the skill of the character and the player throughout the game. From a narrative perspective, this is also true if you look at games like Uncharted. The character in there, Nathan Drake, has lots of horrible things happen to him throughout the course of the game. And players are attracted to how is he going to get out of it this time, cliffhanger style, which is very well for the kind of pulpy flavor of Uncharted. But there are lots of other characters, if you look through interactive media, whether it's a defined third-person character you're playing, or even to a certain extent where the player is an avatar, as the players run into conflict, that's where your interest in the game becomes more significant. So there is some overlap between game design and literary design, but the idea is that conflict being important and interesting to characters is significant to both sides of that. And finally, going completely off task into gift psychology. And this is something that actually I started looking into from Ralph Koster, who has done an amazing designer, who's done a great book called A Theory of Fun, and at GDC in 2010 did a presentation on social dynamics. And one of the things he talked about in that presentation is gift psychology, and specifically reciprocity, which he defines as, in an iterative simulation, the social expectation of a future return of a gift. And it really goes into the idea that in gift psychology, giving a gift is not the entirety of the process. There's actually 3 components to gift psychology, which is the act of giving the gift, the act of receiving the gift, and then the expectation of the receiver that they will reciprocate at some point in the future. And regardless of the people's frustrations with, say, Christmas being a very kind of commercial holiday and whatnot, there is the idea that if the person who reciprocates and the person who gave the gift initially, there becomes a sense of satisfaction in the reciprocation specifically, but also a sense of social closeness between the two individuals. And during the course of reading this, I found into a great anecdote about Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin at the time was running for political office, and his chief rival was doing the at the time equivalent of like attack ads. He was saying horrible things in newspapers, he was doing lots of speeches, he really vilified Franklin. And this man was very proud of the fact he had a very comprehensive library. So Benjamin Franklin wrote to him and said, if you don't mind, there's a book in your library that I would like to reference for some research I'm doing. Can I borrow it and give it back to you? And of course the man, prided himself as a gentleman, graciously allowed Benjamin Franklin to loan this book. And then a week later, he sent it back with a note saying, "Thank you very much, I appreciate the loan." After that point, the attacks against Franklin dramatically decreased, because Franklin knew that there is now a social bond there. Even though Franklin never gave any kind of indication of, you must reciprocate this, because the man felt benevolent by giving a gift, and Benjamin Franklin was just very polite about it, the man felt a social closeness to him because of that loop. A gift was given, a gift was received, and Benjamin Franklin reciprocated with a thank you note. And so as a result, the man felt a social closeness to him. He couldn't be as angry at Franklin as a result. So the personal attacks dropped. It became much more professional. Franklin still lost, but it did show the fact that this is something that is meaningful and is genuine. So this happens actually in live-action games a lot, I feel, but it's really probably closer to barter as we currently use it, which is that, hey, I'll go ahead and do this thing for you if you do this thing for me, which it ties very well into the political style of LARP in large-scale games. But even outside the game, it's like, hey, do you want to have character ties kind of discussions, usually much more of a barter style of discussion. You know, I could say that you're my sire, then you know I can bring this thing to your role play, but still there is a gift psychology there. At a certain level, I'm giving you access to something, and you're giving me something as well. So I've gone all over the board here. I've talked about literary structure and gift psychology and game design, and so how does all this tie into the experiences I had with my characters? Well, there's a couple of key points. One is that you can lose, initial positive, but those goals are constantly iterating and changing. So while you can lose, you're losing and winning in lots of small components rather than on a large scale. There may be large-scale goals you ultimately win or lose at, but getting to that point, you're winning and losing on a game-by-game or scene-by-scene basis as well as at a larger scale. Different people do get different values of fun from winning and losing depending on not only their goals but also their play style. So what they consider to be a loss may not be the same thing as what you consider to be a loss. A third is that losing a conflict for a goal is actually what makes fictional characters interesting, and the fictional characters that we portray also become interesting when they fail at a certain level. And finally, humans are actually wired to reciprocate, especially if someone does something for them or takes a fall for them. Certainly, old school mafia psychology works here, and the fact is that, you did time in prison for the mob, so we're going to hook you up when you get out of prison. This is obviously a very extreme example, but humans are wired to do this. When you've done something for me and you've put yourself out for me, I feel like I need to reciprocate that. So if you take these pieces together, it leads to a lot of powerful options that you can use inside of live-action games. And I'll go into a few of those. There's different ways that you can actually use strategies to win or lose to your benefits inside of a game. Before I go into that, though, this is a wide variety of tools. And because I mentioned earlier, different people have different expectations of what they find fun. Not all of them are going to appeal to everyone. So I wanted to give a variety of options that I have seen work, both myself and other people have done. So definitely just look through them, and if some work, others don't, or if none of them work, that's fine, but think about them critically and see what actually will be useful for you as a player, as well as what might be useful for your own chronicle. It's okay if not everyone enjoys these. But on the flip side, even knowing about them, if you don't find them useful, other people may find a particular tool to be powerful for them. So if you keep them in mind as you're helping to educate players when they're getting frustrated with the game, or as a storyteller if you're trying to coach a player, having these in the back of your head may find that something you don't find useful, but they may be the one thing that helps them unlock what they're finding interesting in the game. So the first one is trade sacrifice, which is something I actually alluded to in yesterday's presentation. I'll go into more detail here. The idea is to find ways to help other players in the game as a player to get what they want with little to no sacrifice to yourself. This is probably the lowest form of quote-unquote losing. Really, it's possible to like, hey, I could do this one thing for you and it doesn't cost me a whole lot, but it makes your game better. Then I'm not really giving up much except for a little bit of my time, or maybe just a couple of quick bits inside of a game. But more often, you're probably going to have to do what's called trade sacrifice, which is you give up something you consider fun for somebody else, with the idea that they'll, down the line, pay you back. I actually have a couple of example of this, but the idea is that if you give something up and just say, hey, I'll make you look cool, I'll do this for you so you can have a good time, there's that expectation that they'll reciprocate. And it also brings the community together because now you guys have a shared experience. This is, from a mechanical level, from Vampire the Masquerade specifically, the idea of how boons work in a much more explicit example is like, I've done this favor for you and now you pay me back. But sometimes even not phrasing expectation, it forces people to have that kind of distance in their head of like, I need to complete this loop, I need to close this circuit so I can move forward and get the satisfaction of having paid that back. And as a result, again, like with Benjamin Franklin's example, your community can be drawn together going through this experience. But one example of a small sacrifice, going back to the 4 playstyles I mentioned earlier, you have a cultivator and an actor, a person who's interested in having mechanical superiority, and a person who really enjoys character portrayal. And they're in a combat scene. And what the cultivator wants out of this is he wants to show that his mechanical superiority is valid. I have understood this system to a level that allows me to have an impact on your character. The actor wants his character to gain notoriety. He doesn't really care about winning or losing the fight. He wants to be seen as a notoriously dangerous person. And so they actually compare sheets, and they agree the cultivator's sheet is going to be superior because that's what the cultivator finds enjoyable. And so they arbitrate the combats. That way the actor loses, but he gets a disfiguring scar. And so now the character looks more dangerous. And the other characters are going to see this guy with a scar who got into this big fight with this other guy that's notoriously dangerous and got out of it. So the actor's getting the response he wants. He wants to be seen as a dangerous, notorious character. The cultivator gets that sense of mechanical superiority because other players recognize, yes, your understanding of the system is in fact superior. Everybody wins, and it's only a little bit of sacrifice for the actor's part. Whereas trading sacrifice can be a little bit larger. You have a scene where a fixer and a socialite are in the scene. This fixer is a person who wants to solve problems, and a socialite is someone who really just wants cool social interactions. A major NPC walks into the scene to cause problems. So the storyteller asks the players, what do you want out of this experience with the NPC? Because there seems to be some frustration. The fixer really wants to solve whatever problem this NPC is dragging in. This NPC is coming here to cause some shit. I want to be where the shit is caused so I can make sure the shit goes away, and I get satisfaction for having solved that problem. Whereas the socialite really wants to engage with this badass NPC and get a cool scene out of it. So, and the ultimate side, the NPC is going to talk to the socialites, and the fixer can overhear that. Whereas the fixer finds out what's going on, gets the secret information, then they sneak off to solve the problem. The socialite gives up looking into the problem to keep the NPC there to talk and get that cool scene. The fixer gives up actually asking the questions he necessarily wants from the NPC, but he gets to go solve the problem. Both sides are giving up something out of that scene they could have wanted, but they're both getting ultimately what they actually desire. They're both losing a little bit, but they're gaining in the things that they really care about. And that's ultimately the core of trading sacrifice, is giving up something that's secondary to your primary interests and focusing on what's really important. Another way you could do this is actually building impossible goals. Impossible goals, if you set an impossible goal for yourself, it changes your expectations of what you can get out of it. Because if you know you can't win, then losing isn't so bad. It's something that's going to happen. You're going to fail, but then you can kind of choose in what ways you're going to fail. And you can go into each situation kind of with a certain expectation. This is akin to, there's kind of an anecdotal advice, but for a while, especially in the Sabbat Chronicle, it was play your character as if they're going to die that night. And that really changes how you enjoy the game, because if every night you're assuming this is the last time to play as a character, that changes how you interact with the game, and as a result, the whole game has a certain different kind of dynamic than if you're going and expecting, oh, well, I'll be here for a month or two so I have some time. But one of the things about impossible goals that's important is it should feel possible on some level. And this is kind of a hard point to go into, but it's something akin to, I want to become a member of the inner circle of the Camarilla. That's probably impossible for most Chronicles, but it feels like something I could theoretically do, as opposed to, I want to become Cain. It's probably not going to happen even realistically inside of the game world. Another example in Apocalypse is, I want to defeat this really, defeat the head of Pentex. Probably not going to happen for your specific character, as opposed to, I want to personally kill the worm. That's not going to happen. But there's goals that are impossible from an outside perspective. Outside the game, they're not going to happen. But inside the game, they could happen. And as a result of that, you get some satisfaction out of the smaller victories towards that, because when you have this impossible goal, obviously you're going to have lots of things to lead up to that. And the iteration of those small victories become much more valuable. And again, you're facing expectation because you're still you're going to lose. You're framing yourself for ultimate failure, but those little successes and victories become much more important and are really, I think, more atomic to your experience. You're not focused on this hopeful big picture win. The big picture win's never going to happen, so you're focused on the game-to-game wins. And that could change your experience, and also more likely to give up a little bit because, my character's going to fail as a goal anyway, so I'm okay with giving up a little bit here to help somebody else out. And on top of that, some players really gravitate towards other players going after these impossible goals because people love underdogs. It's like, oh yeah, no, Tommy, you'll be part of the inner circle, I'll help you out, I'll give my resources behind you. Everyone knows this is not going to happen, but some people like that uphill battle. These are the kinds of people who enjoy games like Call of Cthulhu, for example, where you're gonna die at some point in time during this game, but they really enjoy the experience of the downward spiral. These are people who like really, really dark movies, movies that have a very, very dark end. There are kind of psychology people who really enjoy that experience, and so by providing it inside the game, you may also draw connections and other players towards you who gravitate towards this Sisyphean goal. Another portion of this is also selling like a champ. And for those of you who aren't familiar, which actually only about half the audience, strangely, selling is a wrestling term for professional wrestling. So it basically, ultimately means is, since everyone knows that professional wrestling is fixed, there's one guy's going to win, one guy going to lose, and selling is a skill of the loser making the winner look as good as possible. And more specifically, making particular moves look as good as possible. The picture I have up there is of Ric Flair, who's one of the most respected men for this exact talent, because he's been around for a very long period of time, but some guy who just started in the present business is going to look dangerous because Ric's going to make him look amazing. He's going to yell and scream and slap the mat and look like he's in a lot of pain, making this newcomer look amazing and dangerous. And that's a fantastic skill that he has, and he's treasured for that skill and has actually been put in the Hall of Fame for things like having that skill. So it is one thing to lose, but it's another thing to make the conflict look good while you're losing. So it's one thing, it's like, okay, yeah, I lost, whatever, and moving on, but another thing, okay, you know, I'm going to yell and scream and talk shit about how badly I lost and get all my allies together to avenge this slight. The more the loss looks good, not only are you helping the player out, and again, there's that reciprocity possibly at play, but also you're engaging other players who are unrelated to the conflict in, because there's something cool happening over here. What's all this about? And showcasing it also just makes it feel more epic as a result, because lots more people are now interested in paying attention to this. And again, the whole game, or at least a larger portion of the game than just the people in the conflict, are getting engaged. And as a result of this, people will remember a good sell over a boring win. Some of the most famous matches Ric Flair's been in, he lost. They're not necessarily ones that he won in. Some of our more memorable characters in fiction are those that ultimately didn't win, such as, for example, Eddard Stark in Game of Thrones. He lost. Sorry, spoilers. But the awesome death scene is really the ultimate version of selling. At that point in time, you've lost. I mean, there's quite literally nothing's going to happen after that. I mean, your amount of options and the amount of impact you have in the Chronicle is stopped at that point with that character. So it's your last chance to really make an impact on the Chronicle and the players around you. And on top of that, a lot of times, what maybe people don't quite realize is the person, the player, doing the killing may not be cool with this. They may be conflicted because, like, oh man, I know how much you love that character and you're my friend, and so they may be conflicted about this. And if you're entertaining them and showing, hey, this is really cool, we can do this amazing thing, then they're going to feel cooler about the scene. And again, there's that kind of social expectation of, I killed your character and you were really awesome about it, so I should do something about it for your next character. That reciprocity kicks into play, but also you're just generally entertaining the person who may not be emotionally completely cool with the situation. It doesn't have to be grand, it doesn't have to be massive. Some well-chosen final words or just a couple of minor points can really be profound, because as humans, death fascinates us, and even fictional death, we're still kind of drawn to. And so just making that moment a little more poignant can really have large repercussions. But a particularly powerful death scene means you can have consequences and repercussions long after your character is gone. I know I personally experienced, as I mentioned, you know, my character died 5 years ago and they're still talking about it, which blows me away. I'm baffled and flattered that they have that kind of impact. But a lot of that was because I ended up having a fairly carefully staged death scene, and we actually were able to work out in a way that the maximum amount of impact for the players involved. So having that powerful death scene means that even though you're not playing your character anymore, people still care about your character, and they're still making decisions and impacting with your character's impact, even though they're gone. The ghost of your character, as it were, has a very real impact on the game. So with all of that, I've thrown a bunch of stuff at you. Did you guys have any particular questions or thoughts on anything I've covered with this? Yes?
Okay, I give up. What's the character you keep talking about that everybody was celebrating?
Oh, Nick Eben. He was my Invictus character for Requiem. He's a satisfied Invictus character. Okay. And apparently the Invictus had a meeting, and they're just like using him as the example of this is how you should be in the Invictus. I'm like, really? He was kind of a jerk and slept around a lot, but awesome. You know, I'm glad you have idealized him in that way.
That is the Invictus idea.
Awesome, fantastic. No one told me.
Nick Eben was actually an Invictus hipster because he did all that shit before it was cool. And all the rest of these fuckers are just like trying to be Nick.
Do you have any other questions, or?
What do you do with gamers that no sell? I mean, like gamers that no sell anything but marking off health boxes.
Well, honestly, a lot of this. This presentation is really, my previous presentation has been lots about, like, here's how you can talk to other people and get them to help out. This is really more of an internal presentation. This is about getting people to kind of take strategies into themselves and doing what's awesome. So it's really hard to kind of say, what would be great if you could kind of stop, look at your character sheet, and make this scene awesome for me. It's not really an easy way to do that. So the only way we can do is by example. That's one thing I found when I gave the example of the character I followed up with, which was Vitya, my second Raccoon character. By going around and just openly talking about the fact that this character's fucked. I mean, I really based him off, he's a Russian character, and I based him off of Russian literature, where bad things happen to Russian characters. And what we found on a local game was that other people started buying into this kind of glorious demise, and they started doing more stuff. They started leaning into the loss and making it a little more epic, and I think the whole game as a result really benefited from that. But so the really only we can do is kind of lead by example, is to say, and to not only talk about it, but and say, that was an awesome scene, thank you so much. And sometimes, I'm with you. I mean, I just, in the back of my head, it's like going, I was screwed, that was a horrible rules call, that was terrible, I'm frustrated by this, but if you can get past that moment and try to make the scene awesome for everybody else, then go back to your room and bitch. But then the next time you play, that person's probably more likely to do the same thing, and everyone kind of focuses on the moment of the fact that we're also our audience as well as our rivals, and focus on that audience moment. Then I think people will more likely to take the opportunity to be, hey, that guy got attention when he died. I like attention, so when I die, I want to have attention on me, so I'm gonna do something cool. And this is a way that seems to work. So really, I mean, apart from them like watching this and then going, yeah, it's totally something I want to do, leading by example is really the only way to get people who just don't seem to be interested in providing those grand experiences. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, totally.
Anything else? Okay, well, thank you guys very much.